My name is Skylar Dawson. I'm 37 and live alone in Portland, Oregon. To outsiders, my family looks like the perfect American household. Big, close-knit, full of traditions. But inside that house, I was never truly seen as part of it. I'm the eldest of three. Madison, the youngest at 26, is still jobless, but adored like the little angel. Dylan, the middle child at 33, has 2 divorces behind him and nearly $40,000 in credit card debt. Yet my mom still calls him the generous one. And me? I've always been the responsible one. Since childhood, I handled everything. Made dinner when mom worked late, picked Dylan up from basketball, helped Madison glue pieces of her science project when she cried after being teased at school. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I carried enough weight, I'd finally be treated like a real daughter. Not just a human tool the family unconsciously relied on to function. I was the only kid who knew when tuition was due, who had seafood allergies, and whose driver's license needed renewing. Whenever something went wrong, power outages, late bills, even the neighbor's dog going missing, my parents turned to me like I was their personal crisis hotline. Skylar, I don't know how to open this email attachment. Can you print it for me? Skylar, your brother needs a ride to the airport at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Can you take him? Skylar, I know you have meetings this week, but can you pick up Madison's wedding cake? I've got a migraine. And I did it all, without complaining. Because I thought that's how love worked. I still remember my 35th birthday. It was a Monday, pouring rain, no text, no call, nothing. But the next day, I still showed up at Madison's office with the proposal she'd asked me to edit over the weekend. She gave me a distracted hug, eyes glued to her phone. And me? I felt thankful. Pathetically thankful. That she even remembered my name. I once gave Dylan $7,000 for an emergency loan I never saw again. I co-signed on an SUV Madison bought just because it looked more Instagrammable, even though I hated the shallow image she chased. I used to think, they're not doing this on purpose, they're just used to me always being here. But slowly, incident by incident, I started to realize something harsher. My family didn't see me as a person with feelings, limits, or needs. I was a tool. A fix. The cleanup crew. One day, I asked my mom a simple question. Whether I could skip the weekend gathering because I was exhausted after a brutal shift. She sighed, full of disappointment. You're always busy. You never think about your family. That sentence cut deeper than she knew. All those years of sacrifice, of trading solitude for duty, they weren't appreciated, they were expected. That was the turning point. I saw it clearly. If I stopped being useful, they'd stop including me. And worse, the bitter truth? I was never chosen, just used. My presence in their lives was transactional. But I started to change. Not by shouting or demanding fairness, but by quietly withdrawing, one step at a time. I stopped sending money when Dylan texted, urgent. I didn't return Madison's call about her last-minute website mock-up. I ignored Mom's text. Skylar, your dad needs help scanning a... I didn't disappear. I simply stopped existing as their shadow. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I was sitting in a small cafe in the Alberta Arts District, tweaking slides for a Monday morning pitch when my phone rang. It was Lydia, my maternal cousin, and the only relative who still shared family gossip like it was breaking news. Sky, did you hear? This year's Thanksgiving is happening at your parents' place, right? I kept my eyes on the laptop. Yeah. Why? What are you planning to wear? I paused. Lydia, what's going on? I don't know anything. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Skylar, you're not on the list. I saw the group email. Everyone got copied. Cousins, uncles, aunts. Except you. My heart skipped. For a moment, I hoped it was just a tech glitch. I called my mom directly. She answered in her usual flat tone. I'm in the middle of making pecan pie. What's going on? Why wasn't I invited? I asked, straight to the point. Silence. A long, heavy pause. Well, this year, your dad and I wanted to keep it small, just close family. Fewer people means less stress. I furrowed my brow. I am your daughter, not some distant cousin. I know, Skylar, but you've been so busy. Lately you've seemed distant. We thought you could use some rest. And don't forget, last year you only stayed for 2 hours. Because I had to go back to work at the hospital, I snapped, and I paid for the entire meal. She said nothing. I sent over more than $1,200 3 weeks ago, I continued, voice cold. I placed the turkey order with Johnson's Farm, the Southern Spile stuffing from Ethel's, and the pumpkin cheesecake from Sweet Nest. The whole order was under my name. The delivery address? Your house? You did it to help, she said softly. But inviting you, that was a separate decision. The rage boiled under my skin. I forced a deep breath to keep myself from yelling in the cafe. Family? You mean the people who need my money, but don't want my presence? I hung up. That night, I opened my order confirmation emails. I hadn't just chipped in. I paid for the whole thing. No one thanked me. No one asked if I'd be there. They just assumed I'd fund it. And quietly erased me from the table I set. I called Johnson's Farm, the ones delivering the 16-pound organic turkey my mom insisted on every year. Hi, Ms. Dawson. The rep greeted me warmly. Would you like to update your order? No, I'd like to cancel it. There was a pause. It's a custom order and we're pretty close to the date. Is there a specific reason? I was uninvited from the meal I paid for. Is that reason enough? My voice was flat, but inside, a fire raged. I did the same with Ethel's and Sweet Nest. At first they hesitated. But once I sent receipts, my ID and the payment details, all under my name, they agreed to refund. On Thanksgiving morning, I stayed in my pajamas, poured myself a mug of hot apple cider, and watched a movie. At exactly 12:18 p.m., my phone rang. It was my dad. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Skylar, what happened with the order? Everyone's here waiting, nothing showed up. I feigned surprise. Really? That's odd. Maybe Mom should check with whoever placed it. You placed it? He barked. Did you cancel? I took a slow sip of cider and replied calmly. I assumed no one needed anything from me. I didn't say another word. I hung up as the chaos erupted on the other end. My mom's voice, Madison's shouting, Uncle Ron complaining, all swirling into a noisy storm of confusion and disappointment. I sat there in silence, staring out the window at Portland's cold gray sky. Outside, the last red leaves drifted lazily from the trees. In that moment, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. I thought it would end there. A cold cancellation, an empty dinner table, a lesson deep enough to make them think twice. But I overestimated my family's sense of shame. That evening, after my dad's call, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Madison's texts came in rapid fire. Like popcorn in a microwave. Are you insane? Mom's crying in her room. Dylan had to drive all the way to Walmart in Medford for a frozen turkey, and today was supposed to be his day off. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I knew anything I said would be twisted into a new version of the story. I'd lived in this family long enough to understand. The one who defends herself is always called dramatic, petty, or divisive. I switched my phone to silent. The next morning, I opened Instagram and saw Madison's story, a long table set with whatever they could scramble together, captioned. When you have to cook because someone forgot to place the order. But family is still everything, grateful anyway. She didn't name me. But everyone knew who someone was. I just scoffed. 3 days later, I got a text from Mom, just one line. We missed you that day. Hope you're doing well. No apology, no ownership, not a single word about being excluded. It was the emotional equivalent of a throw blanket, not to comfort, but to cover up the mess. I didn't respond. Instead, I got an unexpected call from the only person in my family who'd never faked affection. Aunt Ruth. She's Mom's younger sister, lives in Eugene. Since I was little, she's quietly sent me birthday cards, hand-baked Christmas cookies, and never made promises she didn't keep. Her voice was low and steady. They really hurt you, didn't they, Sky? My throat tightened. I'd spent days acting strong, but just one well-placed question cracked it all open. I whispered, "They didn't invite me, Auntie. But they still let me pay for everything." Aunt Ruth sighed. I heard, and honestly, it's not just you. I stayed quiet, waiting for her to go on. Your mom has always been obsessed with appearances. She's terrified of anything that might expose the imperfections. So when someone goes off script, she calls it betrayal. Her words hit me like a fist to the chest, painful, but dead on. You don't have to go back and suffer, she continued. But if you do choose to show up again, make sure you get to write the next chapter. Don't let them finish your story for you. After that call, I started thinking. Not about revenge, but about reclaiming my voice. I was no longer the nodding daughter. And if they were going to pretend I didn't matter, I would make it impossible for them to keep ignoring me. A few days later, I asked a friend who worked in event planning to help me reprint all the receipts, my signature, their home address, every line item from the canceled Thanksgiving feast. I pasted them onto the back of a custom Thanksgiving card embossed with the words, "Thanks for showing me who was a guest and who was just the wallet." I mailed that card to every single relative who sat at that table. No comments, no explanations. Just a quiet reminder that silence doesn't equal ignorance. It's often just timing. That night, Dylan called. He never calls unless he needs money. His voice was uneasy. "You really sent that card?" "I did," I answered calmly. He gave a dry, nervous laugh. "Honestly? You scared the hell out of everyone. Mom says you're having a nervous breakdown. Madison says you're going through a late-life rebellion." I laughed. "And what do you think?" He exhaled. "I think maybe you were right. That table, it felt emptier than the missing food. It was missing the one person who always held it all together." I froze. Dylan had never said anything like that before. "Thank you," I said quietly. I didn't know if his words came from guilt or fear of being next. But it was something. A crack. And I knew, once the first crack appears, the wall doesn't stand for long. 2 days after I sent out that card, "Thanks for excluding me from the dinner I paid for," the Dawson family went into quiet panic mode. No one confronted me directly, but social media started humming with passive-aggressive noise. Vague posts from Madison like, "Some people just can't stand not being the center of the universe," and a picture from my mom showing a table of canned food with the caption, "Still thankful, even when your own leaves the whole family hungry." I didn't respond. Until I got a surprise call from Mom's longtime bridge partner, Helen, a woman who's played cards with her every Wednesday for 15 years. "Skylar, I don't mean to meddle," she said, her voice cautious, "but your mother's been telling people you're unstable, that you've been acting out, that you sabotaged Thanksgiving to punish the whole family." I went silent. Helen continued. "She's even said you've been in therapy, that you're under severe financial stress and not thinking clearly." My throat tightened. I've never been in therapy, I'm not in debt, and I certainly didn't sabotage anything. I just stopped giving. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table, staring into a cooling cup of tea, searching for an answer I already knew. In my family, anyone who calls out injustice is branded unstable. Anyone who stops sacrificing is labeled selfish. That night, I received a message from Emma, my paternal cousin. "Sky, I heard from Mom. People are saying you've changed. I hope you're okay. I replied simply. I am. For the first time in years, I truly am. But I knew the rumors were spreading. In our group chats, I started noticing the shift. Curious, veiled questions like, Skylar, are you still working at the hospital? Hope everything's okay with you these days. Each question felt like a tiny needle poking at the wall I was trying to rebuild. I didn't defend myself. I said nothing. No rebuttals, no clarifying posts. Instead, I kept my work schedule. Took early shifts, walked after dark with my old headphones, and kept sending handwritten thank you cards to my elderly patients after discharge. I lived my life. The one thing they couldn't manage or manipulate. Then I got a text from Ethan, my cousin who'd stayed quietly in touch since the fallout. Sky, there's something you should know. We met at a small vegan cafe near Alberta. When I arrived, he was already seated, glancing around like he was afraid someone might see us. Madison's been talking about you and your new boyfriend, he began, voice low. She said you're using him to make a statement. That you're bringing him to Christmas just to get back at the family. I looked at him, no longer angry, just tired. No one's asked how I'm really doing, I said quietly. They're too busy trying to spin a new story. Ethan nodded. I know, my mom told me what your mom's been saying. I hate to say this, but they're trying to paint you as losing control, to justify cutting you out of Thanksgiving. I straightened my back, a chill ran from my neck to the base of my spine. What do you think you can do? I asked. He paused, then said, I can't speak for you. But if you need someone to tell the truth, I'm here. I looked at my cousin. Under the soft cafe lighting, his face showed more guilt than I expected. Maybe he'd been quiet too long, too. I left that cafe without a plan for revenge. But I knew one thing. I won't let anyone write my life as a script I never agreed to. Christmas Eve, the air outside my parents' house in suburban Lake Oswego felt unusually sharp. The Oregon sky hung low, thick with gray clouds, and the snow barely clung to the stone steps, just enough to freeze, not enough to be beautiful. I stepped out of the car at exactly 6:17 p.m., my dark red wool coat swaying slightly in the wind. In my hand was another hand, smaller, thinner but solid like steel. You sure about this? My grandmother whispered. I nodded and rang the doorbell. Laughter, the clink of silverware, Madison's loud voice drifted from inside. Then the door swung open. My mother stood there. Her face froze solid, like a lake hit by winter wind. She looked at me, then at the woman beside me. Her gaze stalled, like she'd been slapped with a bucket of ice water. You brought her here? I smiled. I figured it was time people looked each other in the eye, without the fogged-up lens of the past. My grandmother. Evelyn adjusted her scarf. 78 and still standing tall, her silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her eyes clear as glass. Hello, Helen, she said calmly, tilting her head. It's been a while. My mother pressed her lips into a thin line. You think this is the right moment? Absolutely, I said, stepping inside, guiding Grandma along. If you think someone you once called too toxic for family gatherings can ruin tonight, then maybe you understand how I felt a few weeks ago. The room fell dead silent. My father stood by the fireplace holding a glass of wine, his expression blank when he saw Grandma Evelyn. Madison, curled against her new boyfriend, let her forced smile dissolve as soon as her eyes met mine. Dylan furrowed his brow but said nothing. Grandma's gaze swept the room. Not confrontational, just cool and steady, like she'd walked into a restaurant she used to frequent long ago. Oh, you still have that clock I gave you, she said, pointing to the brass wall clock. Thought it had been sold or tossed by now. No one replied. I unwrapped my scarf and sank into the sofa like I belonged there. Merry Christmas, everyone! The air crackled with tension. But Grandma calmly sat at the dinner table, poured herself a glass of water, and nodded at each person, like it was just another warm holiday evening. "Are you doing well?" my father asked after a long silence. "Better than ever," she replied. "Though I was a bit sad not to receive an invite last year." My mother spun around. "You know why. You can't just show up like nothing ever happened." "Like nothing happened?" I repeated, my voice soft as breath. "Are you referring to cutting off Grandma after she refused to fund Dylan's coffee shop? Or calling her a troublemaker? Kind of like what you've been calling me lately." Mom's eyes lit with fury. "Don't drag up the past. This is—" "I'm talking about the present, Mom." I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the table. "The present. Where Grandma was erased from this family because she spoke the truth. Just like me." At that, Evelyn set her glass down and looked straight at her daughter. The woman now trembling, though I wasn't sure if it was from anger or fear. "Helen, I didn't come here to assign blame," she said. "I came for Skylar. She's lived years doing everything, being overlooked, and then called unstable just because she refused to stay quiet, just like me." Silence swept the room. Madison let go of her boyfriend's arm, muttered something, and stormed upstairs. Dylan looked at his shoes. My father swirled his wine as if it held answers. Finally, my mom stepped back a little. "Is this what tonight is? A group ambush?" I stood up. "No one's ambushing you. But you will face the consequences of your choices. No one in this room is willing to be rewritten in your version of the story just to protect appearances." Grandma gently placed her hand over mine. "We're not here to win. We're here to be heard. And to remind you that no one stays silent forever." I looked at her, then around the room. My eyes landed on my father, the man who hadn't said a word beyond his conflicted stare. "I don't need an apology," I said. "But I'm done disappearing. If anyone here finds my presence uncomfortable, then tonight is the last time they'll get to sit at a table I once served." No one responded. But in that silence, something shifted. And I knew. This time, the room would never settle back the same way again. 3 days after Christmas, I received a message from my mother. Short, clipped, and cold. No greeting, no punctuation. "Dinner at 6 on Sunday. Your father and I want to talk." I stared at those words on my screen for 5 full minutes. Not a single check-in after everything that had happened. No acknowledgement of the silence that had stretched the entire year. Just a summons. Like I was some wayward daughter who'd embarrassed them in front of the neighbors. I wasn't going to go, but then Aunt Ruth called. "Bye. If you feel strong enough, go. Not for them to talk at you, but for them to hear you. For once." So I went. At 6:12 p.m. on Sunday, I stepped through the iron gate of my parents' home. The place I once belonged to, but was never truly welcomed in. My father stood in the kitchen, white shirt buttoned to the collar, holding a mug of tea. No wine tonight. My mother sat at the head of the dining table as always, like she was hosting a board meeting. Dylan was there. Surprisingly. And someone I didn't expect. Emma. My paternal cousin, who had stayed silent through Thanksgiving and Christmas. No one said a word. It wasn't until I pulled out a chair across from my mother that she finally spoke. "Do you realize how much chaos you've caused?" I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, just a reflex. I'd heard too many ridiculous lines to be shocked anymore. "Do you realize how I was cut from Thanksgiving?" I said evenly. "And instead of apologizing, you labeled me unstable? Told people I was struggling financially, that I needed help." My mother gripped the edge of the table, her manicured nails pressing into the wood. "I never meant to offend. I was worried. You went silent, cut contact, then showed up with her. The woman who severed ties with this family, decades ago. Grandma was exiled by you," I said slowly. just like me. We were both labeled difficult for not bowing to control. Dylan shifted in his seat. Emma glanced between us. The air thickened, heavy and ready to spill over. My father finally broke his silence, for the first time in months. "We're not here to fight. We're here to fix things." I turned to him. "Fix what, exactly, when no one's acknowledged the break?" My mother snapped. "Then what do you want? An apology?" "No," I replied, firmly. "I want you to face what you did. Without spinning it. Without excuses." Silence. Then she stood abruptly, eyes blazing. "I was ashamed," she exploded. "I didn't want people to know that you weren't obeying anymore, that you weren't silent. I did everything I could to preserve the image of this family, even if it meant sacrificing the one child who knew how to hold it all together." The room froze. I didn't feel pity, only clarity. For once, she had said the truth. No filters. No gaslighting. "I don't need you to apologize," I said. "I just need you to understand that from this point on, I'm not carrying this family's burden anymore. I'm not here to make it look perfect." She slumped back into her chair. My father said nothing, his eyes fixed on the far wall. Emma placed her hand on the table. "Skylar, I'm sorry. I knew things were off, but I didn't want to be the one to make things uncomfortable, and I was wrong." Dylan didn't speak, he just gave a small nod, and that tiny gesture meant more than any forced apology I'd ever heard. I stood up. "I don't expect you to change, I'm done hoping for that, but if you continue to rewrite my story to others, I won't stay quiet. You've used shame to control people your whole life. But I'm not ashamed anymore. Maybe you should try living with that feeling instead." I had stood tall, said everything I needed, without shaking. I walked out of that house as the clock struck exactly 7. The wind outside cut sharp across my face, but inside, for the first time in years, I felt warm. I never went back to that house again. Not out of anger, but because I no longer had a reason to walk through the door of a place that only knew how to demand, never how to understand. Since that dinner, my mother sent exactly 4 messages. The first, on Monday. "I think we both said too much, hope you'll reconsider." I didn't reply. The second, on Thursday. "Aunt Ruth is stirring up more division. Don't let her influence you." I quietly blocked her number. The last 2 came on New Year's Eve, 2 minutes apart. "It's a new year, let's not hold on to resentment. Your father says if you don't reach out, he's deleting your number." I didn't reread them. I saved all 4 in a folder on my computer titled, "Evidence of Peace." Instead of reacting, I took action. I changed my phone number, got a new SIM card, shared only with the people I truly trusted. I left every family group chat without saying a word. I also transferred $500 to Aunt Ruth, as a quiet thank you for standing by me when no one else did. She mailed back a handwritten note. "Blood or not, I'm proud of you, for standing tall with your dignity intact." I taped it to the side of my bedroom mirror. Every week, I met Grandma Evelyn. Sometimes at her favorite Italian sandwich shop, sometimes just to walk around Union Lake. We didn't talk much about my mom. Instead, she told me stories. Like the time she refused marriage to a man just because he reminded her too much of her controlling father. I cried laughing when she admitted to hiding hair dye inside an oven to keep her brothers from tattling to Grandpa. I also started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I needed a safe space to untangle the knots that had tightened around my life for decades. In the very first session, I told my therapist, "I don't want to learn how to forgive them. I just want to stop feeling guilty for choosing myself." He nodded, then said, "Then we'll begin with this, learning the difference between silence and boundaries." And I did learn, day by day. I rewrote my work schedule. I stopped taking weekend shifts unless absolutely necessary. I started growing vegetables in wooden planters on my balcony. I bought an old ukulele from a flea market and taught myself basic chords on YouTube. Even though my fingers ached so much I nearly quit. But I kept going. Because this time, I was doing it for me. Not as a chore, not for approval. I started journaling. Words I had never dared to say. I didn't write to be read. I wrote to stop feeling like I had to carry everything in silence. By February, I got a message from Emma, my cousin who had apologized during that defining dinner. I left the family group chat today. I finally understand why you went quiet. If you're open to it, I'd like to invite you over, just the two of us. I said yes. That night wasn't fancy. She made vegetarian lasagna, poured cheap red wine, and played soft jazz from an old Bluetooth speaker. But it was the first dinner in years where I didn't have to tense up to keep the peace. No forced smiles. No walking on eggshells. We talked about work, her new relationship, and the time she caught Madison using my name to apply for funding through an organization I'd never heard of. I shook my head. Then, I laughed. I'll speak the truth from now on, Emma said. I promise. I nodded. You don't need to promise. Just do what's right when no one else will. That night, I went home, looked around my small apartment. Wooden floors I cleaned myself, a slightly crooked painting I hung alone. Everything in that space was mine, earned, chosen, built. No one gave it to me, no one could take it back. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop and started typing a new document. The first line I wrote. Rule for self-respect. If you don't help nourish it, you don't get to destroy it. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I hit save. No one can force me to forgive. No one can stop me from walking away. And if they throw another dinner someday, and my chair is empty, it's no longer a seat meant for me. It's a reminder of someone who once carried everything, but now knows how to set it down and walk away with hands finally free. Skylar's story is a powerful reminder that clarity and strength don't always come from loud confrontations, but from deliberate silence and firm boundaries. In real life, many of us play the role of the reliable one, only to be overlooked until we finally walk away. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's how you reclaim peace and self-respect that's long been denied. What do you think about Skylar's decision? What would you do in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and real-life resilience. I don't know if I was a mistake, but if I go by what my father said the day my mother told him she was pregnant, I can guess the answer. You did this on purpose, didn't you, Lisa? You think this baby will make me stay? My father snarled, his eyes burning with anger. My mother, only 26 at the time, stood frozen in the cramped living room, her arms wrapped around her stomach as if trying to shield me from his cruel words. My name is Emily, and even before I was born, my existence was a problem. My father, Mark, was never the family man type. He lived recklessly, spent money without a second thought, and was always chasing something new, something exciting, anything but the responsibilities of being a husband and father. He met my mother at a weekend party, and 6 months later, they rushed into marriage for a love that, perhaps, never truly existed. A child like me was never part of his plans. The first years of my life were filled with endless arguments. My mother longed for stability, while my father only wanted to escape anything that tied him down. They fought about money, about unpaid bills, about my father coming home late, smelling of alcohol. Sometimes, I was the reason for their fights. She needs a father, Mark. You can't just keep running away, my mother screamed one night. My father only scoffed. A father? What do you expect me to be, some perfect role model? Sorry, but that's not the life I signed up for. And so, the fights went on for the first 4 years of my life. I don't remember much, but the faded memories still haunt me. The sound of shattering glass, my mother's muffled sobs behind closed doors, the irritated look in my father's eyes whenever he glanced at me. Until one day, my mother decided to end it all. When I was 4, she filed for divorce. And by the time I turned 5, my father was gone without a word. No new address, no phone number, no birthday card, no child support. He vanished as if he had never existed, leaving my mother and me in our old apartment in a small Texas town. The neighbors whispered about my mother, about how she had tied down the wrong man. My mother never spoke of him again, except in moments of anger. A coward, she would say, not a shred of responsibility. Growing up, I learned one thing. Sometimes, family isn't where you find warmth. Sometimes, it's just a place where people leave you behind without looking back. If there was one thing my father left me, it was Grandma Margaret. My mother never spoke about my father, but Grandma Margaret did. She was the only person from his side of the family who still cared about me. When I was little, I didn't know much about her. Just that she would visit our tiny apartment, bringing cookies wrapped in foil and a sad look whenever she saw my mother. Whenever she came, my mother would greet her coldly and find an excuse to stay busy, avoiding sitting with her for too long. Grandma Margaret never reacted to my mother's coldness. She would only smile, bend down, brush my brown hair aside, and say, "You have your father's eyes, Emily." Every weekend, she would take me to her house. A small place, but so much warmer than where I lived. It was a completely different world. No fights, no heavy silence, just the scent of peppermint tea and stories about the past. She told me about my father's childhood. About how he was once a mischievous but bright boy, full of dreams. "Before he became a terrible man, your father was a good child," she said once, her voice heavy with sadness. I loved my weekends at her house. She let me help her bake, read books with me in her sunlit living room, and sometimes we would just sit together in silence. Grandma Margaret never asked about my mother or my life at home. She was simply there. Patient, gentle. Something I had never had with my mother. But when I turned 8, everything changed. One Tuesday evening, my mother got a phone call. I remember she was cooking dinner, and when she heard the voice on the other end, she froze. I had never seen her face turn so pale. "Grab your coat, Emily," she said, her voice unfamiliar. "We need to go to your grandmother's house." My breath caught in my throat. This was the first time my mother was taking me there instead of just letting Grandma pick me up. That night, her usually warm home felt different. She lay in bed, looking smaller than ever. A stack of documents sat on the wooden table beside her, and a man I didn't recognize, who I later learned was her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood quietly in the corner. "Lisa, Emily, thank you for coming," she said, her voice weaker than usual, but still carrying that familiar kindness. "There's something important I need to say." My mother rarely listened to her, but tonight, she sat down without a word of protest. That scared me more than anything else. Grandma Margaret took a slow, deep breath before speaking. "I don't have much time left, and I need to set things in order. This house and part of my assets will go to your aunt, Irene. But..." She paused, turning to me with a soft look. "I've set up an education fund for you, Emily. It will help you go to college, to build a future that no one can take away from you." I stared at her, not fully understanding. But my mother did. I saw her sit up straight, her hands clenched on her lap. And for the first time that night, I felt something from her. Not sadness, but suspicion. "Education fund?" my mother asked, her voice no longer hesitant. Mr. Peterson nodded. "This money can only be used for educational purposes. When Emily turns 18, she will have full control over it." I didn't realize it at the time, but in that moment, something shifted in my mother. A long silence filled the room. Grandma Margaret sighed, taking my hand, her gaze warm but weary. "I just want you to have a chance, Emily. No matter what happens, I hope you remember that I always believe in you." That night, as my mother and I left Grandma Margaret's house, I turned back for one last look. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had to remember that moment. As if, somehow, I already knew it would be the last time I saw her like this. Grandma Margaret passed away not long after. It all happened too fast. One day she was telling me stories about my father, and the next, she was in the hospital. A week later she was gone. Her funeral was small and simple, with only a handful of relatives and close neighbors. I stood beside my mother, clutching her hand, but she didn't hold mine back. Ever since Grandma Margaret had announced the education fund, I had sensed something change in her. After the funeral, life went on as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew something was coming. A storm I couldn't yet predict. 2 years later it arrived. My mother met Daniel, a successful man in finance. He was tall, well-dressed, drove a sleek car, and always carried a charming smile. Unlike my father, Daniel was organized and responsible. Or at least, that's what my mother believed. They had known each other for less than a year when my mother announced they were getting married. "Daniel is a good man, Emily," she said over dinner. "He's going to give us a better life." I didn't argue. Not because I believed her, but because I had long since accepted that my opinions didn't matter in her decisions. But what surprised me the most was that Daniel had a daughter my age. Her name was Madison. When they moved in with us, I was excited. I had always wanted a sibling. Someone to share movie nights with, to exchange secrets with. Someone who might understand me in ways my mother never did. I cleaned up our room, placed a small welcome sign on Madison's bed, and arranged my favorite books on the shelf, hoping she liked reading as much as I did. But when Madison walked in, she barely glanced at the room, wrinkled her nose, and turned to Daniel. "Oh, I have to share a room with her?" she asked, her tone dripping with displeasure. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and smiled. "If you don't like it, sweetheart, I'll make other arrangements for you." My mother was there too. I turned to her, expecting her to say something, anything. But she only nodded. "If Madison wants her own space, I think we can make that happen." And just like that, Madison got her own room. And I quickly realized it wasn't just the room. My mother wasn't mine anymore either. Madison became the center of everything. My mother cared for her in ways she never had for me. Madison wanted to try dance? My mother immediately enrolled her in the most expensive class in town. Madison was into fashion? My mother spent entire weekends taking her shopping, their arms filled with designer bags. And me? I wore clothes from the clearance rack at the mall. I walked home alone, did my homework in an empty room, and ate dinner in silence while my mother and Daniel laughed with Madison. Every day, I felt myself fading away. One time, I proudly brought home a perfect score on my math test. I stood at the dinner table, holding up the paper, hoping for a small moment of recognition. "Mom, I got an A+ on my test." She glanced up and smiled, but before she could say anything, Madison interrupted. "Mom, I just got chosen for the lead group in my dance class." And just like that, the conversation shifted. "That's amazing, sweetheart," my mother beamed, pulling Madison into a hug. The test paper trembled in my hand. That was the moment I realized I didn't matter anymore. My mother didn't need me. Madison had taken my place. Or maybe, she had never wanted me there to begin with. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I knew I wasn't part of this family anymore. Maybe it was when Madison walked in with brand new designer shoes, while I still wore my scuffed sneakers. Or maybe it was when my mother took Madison to a spa weekend and left me home with a pile of textbooks. But perhaps the clearest moment was one night when I overheard my mother and Daniel talking in the kitchen. "Madison should attend Westbridge Academy," Daniel said firmly. Westbridge was one of the most prestigious private schools in the area. Outrageously expensive and filled with wealthy students. "We'll make it work, won't we, Lisa?" My mother was silent for a few seconds. Then she sighed. "Yes, of course, Madison deserves the best environment." I stepped into the kitchen, my chest heavy. "What about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother turned to look at me, momentarily surprised, as if she had forgotten I was there. "You'll continue at Lincoln High, Emily, it's still a good school." I had already expected that answer, but it didn't stop the wave of disappointment from washing over me. But if Madison gets to go to Westbridge, why can't I asked, refusing to back down. Daniel spoke before my mother could. Emily, you're doing great at Lincoln, there's no need for you to change schools. My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of her. Westbridge isn't the right fit for you, Emily. You'll be fine in public school. Fine. That was the word they always used for me. I didn't need the best. I just needed to be fine. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I knew I couldn't change the way they saw me. I would never be Madison in their eyes. I wouldn't get to attend an elite school. I wouldn't be given the best opportunities. But I could still take control of my own future. I stopped trying to win my mother's attention. I stopped showing off my grades, stopped trying to join family conversations where I was always pushed aside. Instead, I focused on my studies. I buried myself in books, spent more time in the library than at home. I joined the academic decathlon team, signed up for the debate club, sought out teachers for extra guidance. I couldn't change their favoritism, but I could carve out my own path. And I did. By senior year, I had the highest grades in my class, earned praise from my teachers, and was even nominated for Student of the Year. I wasn't doing it to make my mother proud anymore. I did it because I deserved it, whether they cared or not. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, my mother called me downstairs with a tone I didn't recognize. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. Daniel sat stiffly on the couch. My mother sat across from me, her expression tense. And Madison, unsurprisingly, was seated next to her father. But this time, she wasn't looking at me with annoyance. Instead, she seemed expectant. My mother gestured to the empty chair in front of them. "Sit down, Emily, we need to talk." Slowly, I sat, feeling the tension thick in the air. Daniel spoke first. "Emily, we know you're about to enter an important stage in your life. College, your future, this is a big milestone." I nodded, waiting to see where this was going. "The thing is," my mother interjected, her voice softer, almost calculated, "Madison is also preparing for college, and things haven't gone as we hoped." My stomach clenched. I knew what was coming. Daniel sighed. "Madison applied to several prestigious schools, but unfortunately she didn't receive any scholarships. Schools like Brown and UCLA are extremely expensive, and as much as we'd love to help, our finances just can't cover that cost." I clenched my hands in my lap. "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. My mother exchanged a glance with Daniel before turning back to me. "Emily, you have the college fund Grandma Margaret left for you." Her voice was slow, careful. "You've been awarded a full scholarship to Texas State University, so you won't need to use that money. But Madison? She does." Madison turned to me then, and for the first time in years her expression wasn't smug or dismissive. Instead, it was filled with fake hope. "If you agree to share your college fund with Madison, it would help her attend a better school," my mother continued. "Family helps each other, Emily. You understand that, don't you?" The room fell silent. I looked at each of them. My mother, who had never truly cared about my future. Daniel, who saw me as nothing more than an extra obligation. And Madison, who had always been given more than I ever had. I took a deep breath. No one moved for a few seconds. My answer rang through the room, clear and unwavering. My mother's expression darkened. "Emily, don't be selfish, you don't even need that money." "But it's mine," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Grandma left it for me, not for Madison. And it's meant for my education. Not to send her to an expensive school the family can't afford." Daniel's grip tightened on the armrest. "Emily, you're being childish. You have the chance to help your sister." "She's not my sister," I cut him off. His face turned red. But it was my mother who reacted the most. "Emily," she snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. "Do you even hear yourself? We are a family. And family helps each other." I let out a dry laugh, unable to hold back the bitterness anymore. "Family? Since when was I ever part of this family? When Madison got everything while I was overlooked? When you said I was fine with whatever little you gave me? When Madison got to go to a private school while I was told public school was good enough for me? My mother said nothing, but her eyes turned ice cold. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice eerily quiet. I stood up. "No, I don't think I will." She rose to her feet as well, staring me down. "Then let me be clear," she said, her voice void of emotion. "If you don't share that money, then the day you turn 18, you're on your own. You won't be this family's responsibility anymore." My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't look away. "Fine," I said, then turned and walked away without looking back. After that tense family meeting, I knew my time was running out. That night I sat in my room, feeling like the world was closing in on me. I wasn't surprised that my mother had threatened to throw me out, but that didn't make the fear any less real. I had never lived on my own before. I didn't know what life outside would be like. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let them take away the last thing I had. The next morning, I called Mr. Carter, the lawyer who had worked with Grandma Margaret. The moment I heard his steady, reassuring voice, I felt a slight sense of relief. "Hello, Emily, I've been expecting your call." I hesitated. "You knew I'd call?" He chuckled. "Do you think your grandmother didn't see this coming?" It turned out that Grandma Margaret had set up the college fund with such strict conditions that no one but me had any claim to it. Mr. Carter confirmed that the moment I turned 18, I would have full control. No one, not even my mother, could force me to share it with Madison. After that call, I started preparing in secret. I found a small apartment near my university. A modest studio, but enough to start fresh. I secured a part-time job at a cafe just a few blocks away, where the owner promised to hire me as soon as I officially moved in. Each night, after everyone was asleep, I quietly packed my belongings, bit by bit, making sure no one would notice. I wasn't a child clinging to the hope of being accepted by this family anymore. I was preparing to leave. My 18th birthday arrived faster than I expected. That morning, as I walked into the kitchen, my mother was already sitting at the table, arms crossed. Daniel stood beside her, his expression stern. Madison sat quietly, avoiding my gaze. "Well?" my mother said, her voice sharp. "Have you changed your mind?" I knew this was the final test. They were waiting, hoping I would cave so they could persuade me one last time. But I stood tall, met my mother's eyes, and said, "No. My decision hasn't changed." No one moved at first. Then my mother slowly rose to her feet. "Fine," she said, her tone eerily calm. "Then get out of my house." My heart pounded, but I refused to let them see any hesitation. "I'm ready," I said firmly. I walked up the stairs and grabbed the suitcases I had packed days before. I didn't give anyone the chance to stop me. As I came back down, Madison looked at me. Her expression unreadable. There was a flicker of surprise, maybe even pity, but also relief. She knew I wouldn't be a problem for her anymore. I walked out the door. No one said goodbye. I left that house without looking back. The early morning air was cold, but I barely felt it. I pulled my suitcase along the sidewalk and got into the taxi I had booked the night before. As we drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror, watching the house disappear behind me. No one stood at the door. No one watched me leave. But I didn't cry. I had a new apartment, a part-time job, and a college fund that was mine alone. I didn't need them. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. 3 days after I left, I started getting messages. Old classmates, teachers, even neighbors I had barely spoken to. "Are you okay? What happened? Is it true what your mom said?" I checked Facebook and immediately understood. My mother had posted a long, dramatic message, filled with grief and blame. "Today is a heartbreaking day for me and my family. After everything we've done, my daughter has turned her back on us. I raised her, gave her a home, and when the family needed her support, she selfishly refused. She left without a second thought, abandoning her stepfather and sister in disappointment. It's painful to realize I raised such an ungrateful child. Below her post were endless comments from people who had no idea what really happened. Oh, sad, kids these days don't appreciate their parents at all. You lived off her mom for years and now does this? Unbelievable. I can't imagine how heartbreaking this must be for you. A bitter anger bubbled up inside me. I had endured their favoritism for years. I had stayed quiet while they gave Madison everything, while I was left to fend for myself. I had walked away silently, but they still wouldn't leave me alone. My mother wanted to paint me as the villain? Fine, then I would tell the truth. I opened my laptop, logged into my account, and started typing. Since my mother has chosen to make this public, I think I have the right to share the truth. I am not the ungrateful daughter she is portraying me as. I didn't leave out of selfishness. I left because I was forced to. I spent my entire childhood watching Madison, my stepfather's daughter, be favored over me again and again. When Madison got to attend a private school, I was told, "Public school is good enough for you." When Madison had designer clothes, I wore clearance rack items. When I earned straight A's, no one cared. But if Madison accomplished even the smallest thing, it was a celebration. And when I received a full-ride scholarship to college, my family wasn't proud. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't ask me what I wanted for my future. Instead, they demanded that I give up my college fund, the money my grandmother left for me, so that Madison could attend an expensive school. When I refused, I was called selfish. And then, they threw me out on my 18th birthday. I didn't choose to leave, I was forced to leave. So before anyone calls me ungrateful, think again, because maybe the truth isn't as simple as the story my mother is trying to sell. I hit post and waited. At first my post only got a few likes, but within an hour the number had grown to hundreds. People started sharing it. I received a message from one of my old teachers. "I always knew you were a hardworking student, Emily. I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself." Some neighbors left comments. "I always wondered why Emily was treated differently. Now it all makes sense." The people who had defended my mother slowly went silent. Some even deleted their comments. That evening, I got a call from my mother. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash, but I didn't pick up. Instead, I blocked her number. I didn't owe them anything anymore. My life officially began the day I unlocked the door to my tiny apartment for the first time. It wasn't big, just a small studio with a single bed, a desk by the window and a tiny kitchenette. But it was mine. A place I could finally call home without walking on eggshells around favoritism or unfair accusations. I spent the afternoon unpacking, carefully arranging my things. Inside an old box, I found a photograph of Grandma Margaret, sitting in her garden, her warm smile as gentle as ever. I placed it on my desk, right next to a small lamp. Looking at it, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. She knew I would need this. She had planned for my freedom, even when she wouldn't be here to see it. The next few days passed quickly. I started my part-time job at the cafe. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mike, was kind. He didn't ask about my past. He just gave me morning shifts, and occasionally let me take home leftover pastries at the end of the day. In the evenings, I sat at my desk, going over my college enrollment papers. The fund Grandma Margaret had left me was enough to cover my education for the next 4 years, but I decided to keep my job anyway. I wanted to take care of myself. I wanted to know I could stand on my own, without anyone else's help. I also cut off all contact with my mother, Daniel, and Madison. They were no longer part of my life. I didn't want to receive another guilt-tripping message from my mother, another lecture about how I had betrayed my family. For years I had fought for a place in that family, but the truth was, I had never really belonged there. And I no longer cared. One afternoon, while cleaning up at the cafe, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. "Emily, I just want to say I admire you. I went through something similar, and I know how painful it is. Stay strong." I was surprised to see that my post was still being shared. Strangers were reaching out to me, telling me that my story had helped them feel less alone. I couldn't change my past, but if it gave someone else the courage to stand up for themselves, maybe everything I had been through was worth it. A few weeks later, I stood at the gates of my university. The place where my new life would truly begin. No more comparisons to Madison, no more walking on eggshells around my mother, no more feeling invisible or unworthy. I stepped forward with the unwavering belief that I was finally on my own path, no longer in anyone's shadow. And with every step, I felt lighter than ever before. Emily's story is not just about escaping family injustice. It's a lesson in self-worth and independence. In life, not everyone who carries the title of family truly loves us. Sometimes, we have to accept that not everyone is worth our sacrifice. Emily chose her own path, leaving behind toxic relationships to build a future where she was free to make her own choices. Her story is a reminder that we have the right to protect what is ours, even if it means walking away alone. What do you think about Emily's story? Have you ever experienced favoritism or unfairness in your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about family, life, and the lessons we all need to learn. My name is Emily. I was born when my parents were in their 40s and already had a 13-year-old daughter named Laura. Laura was the pride of the family, and to them she was enough. We never planned to have a second child, my mom often said, not with malice but without hiding the truth either. In moments like that I would stay silent, fully aware that my existence came from the urging of my maternal grandparents. They were the only ones in the family excited about my arrival, having pleaded with my parents to have another granddaughter. But to my parents, I was merely a responsibility they were forced to bear. By the time I was born, Laura was already a teenager absorbed in her own world, hanging out with friends, preparing for SATs, and having endless conversations about college. I can't recall a single time when Laura genuinely paid attention to me. She wasn't mean, but she acted as if I didn't exist. While I played with my dolls alone in the corner of the living room, Laura would lounge on the sofa, engrossed in phone conversations with her friends. Laura, don't forget your SAT books, my mom would remind her, carefully packing them into her bag. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the dining table with my math homework in front of me, waiting for someone to notice that I also needed help. But no one ever did. My parents quickly established a routine that shaped my entire childhood. Every morning they dropped me off at my grandparents' house before heading to work. "Here's your little one," my dad would say to my grandpa, jingling his keys as if he couldn't wait to hand me over. My grandparents' home became my true refuge. They picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, took me to the park, and always made sure I was well fed. I found myself late at night, my parents would come to get me, often looking tired and slightly irritated by the obligation. "Emily, you're the best thing that ever happened to us," my grandma would whisper as she hugged me tightly. In those moments, I almost forgot what it felt like to be rejected by my parents. At home, however, life was a constant reminder that I was an unnecessary child. When Laura left for college, I hoped, just a little, that my parents might finally pay more attention to me. I was wrong. "Emily, clean the bathroom," my mom called out as soon as I walked through the door after school. All of Laura's old household chores were passed down to me, along with a slew of new ones. I quickly adapted to doing laundry, cleaning, and eventually cooking. When I turned 15, my mom abruptly declared, "You're old enough now. From now on, you'll handle dinner." And that's how I started learning to fend for myself in the kitchen, teaching myself to cook. From simple dishes like spaghetti, to more elaborate meals. All to serve my parents. My life became an endless cycle of responsibilities and indifference. My parents only saw my worth through the chores I completed, and even when I did everything perfectly, they never expressed satisfaction or genuine interest in me. I grew used to being overlooked in my own home, though deep down, I always held on to the hope that one day, they would change. But that day never came. My maternal grandparents, Harold and Margaret, were the guiding light in the otherwise gloomy days of my childhood. Every morning when my parents dropped me off at their house, a wave of relief washed over me. It was the only place where I truly felt loved. "Emily, you're a little angel," Grandma Margaret would often say, gently stroking my hair. She had a way of making me feel special, even when the rest of the world seemed to see me as a burden. Grandpa Harold was the most patient person I've ever known. During afternoons spent working on homework at the dining table, he would sit beside me, carefully guiding me through each number and calculation. "You're doing great," he would say, his eyes sparkling with pride whenever I solved a difficult math problem. To my grandparents, I wasn't the forgotten child. I was the heart of the warm, loving world they had created. When this physical world went away, on weekends they would always take me to the park or the library. Those were rare moments when I experienced true joy, laughing and playing without worrying about the endless chores waiting for me at home. I still remember the time Grandpa Harold took me to a small bakery near their house. "Emily, would you like to try this?" he asked, pointing to a cupcake topped with a swirl of frosting. It was the first time I felt that someone genuinely wanted to make me happy. When they settled on a loaf, Grandma Margaret also taught me how to care for the flowers in her little garden. "See, Emily? Flowers need love and care just like people do," she said, carefully pulling out weeds. Every time I saw the flowers bloom, I felt a sense of peace, as if the wind carried my worries away. My grandparents didn't just give me love, they also taught me invaluable lessons. "Emily, life isn't always easy, but you have to learn to stand tall," Grandpa Harold would say during our heart-to-heart talks. They weren't wealthy, but they always saved what they could so I wouldn't lack anything. Grandma Margaret often told me that from the day I was born, they had opened a small savings account for me, just in case Emily ever needs it. I didn't know then how that money would later change my life, but I did know that their love and sacrifices made me feel incredibly fortunate. The years I spent at their house were not only a refuge from my troubled childhood, but also a foundation for the person I would become. While my parents saw me as a responsibility, my grandparents saw me as their pride and joy. They taught me to be strong, grateful, and never to give up, no matter how hard life became. One day, I asked Grandma Margaret why they loved me so much. She simply smiled and replied, "Because you deserve it, Emily. You're a gift that heaven sent to us." Those words etched themselves into my heart and became a source of strength that would help me overcome challenges in the years to come. Whenever I came home from a long day at school and saw their radiant smiles welcoming me, I knew I had found where I truly belonged. It wasn't the house where I was born, but in my grandparents' home I learned what unconditional love really meant. Those memories didn't just help me endure the hardest parts of my childhood, they became a beacon of hope that would guide me through the darkest moments of my life. Everything we teach about love, it's the wind that never ends, and so every one of us deserves an opportunity to manifest those lessons. When I graduated from high school, with excellent grades and 3 acceptance letters from top universities, I had hoped that my efforts would finally be recognized. I held the letters in my hands, filled with pride and excitement. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I thought my parents would finally see my worth. But I was wrong. That evening, I placed the 3 letters on the dining table and shared the news with my parents. "I got accepted into NYU, UCLA, and Michigan State," I said, unable to hide my excitement. Their response, however, left me stunned. My mom, not even bothering to look up from her plate, simply said, "That's good news, but we don't have the money to pay for your college." I froze. "But Mom, you paid for Laura's college, and even spent thousands of dollars on her wedding," I protested, my voice trembling. She shrugged, her tone indifferent. "Laura's different. We saw potential in her." The words pierced me like a knife. Everything I had done, all the late night studying and sacrifices to achieve top grades, was dismissed with a cold, simple statement. My dad added, "If you really want to go to college, get a job and take care of yourself. Adults take responsibility for their own lives." I didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. After dinner, I went to my room, tears streaming silently down my face. I couldn't believe that the people who gave me life could be so heartless. The next morning, I gathered the courage to call Grandma Margaret and tell her everything. She listened quietly, and then said, "Emily, "Come over right now, we need to talk." When I walked through their door, Grandma Margaret was already waiting, her arms wide open to embrace me. "We knew this day would come," she said, her voice warm but firm. I looked at her in confusion. Grandpa Harold emerged from his office holding an old briefcase. "Sweetheart, we've been preparing for this day for a long time," he said, opening the case to reveal a stack of bank. Grandma Margaret explained. "When you were little, we started saving. We knew your parents wouldn't treat you the same as Laura, and we couldn't let you be disadvantaged." Each number on those papers was a testament to their love and foresight. "This money is enough for you to attend any university you choose," Grandpa Harold said, his eyes full of hope. I couldn't hold back my tears. "You did all this for me?" I choked out. "Of course, Emily," Grandma Margaret replied, her eyes shining. "You deserve the best." Thanks to their savings, I decided to attend New York University, where I knew I could pursue my dream of a career in finance. The days leading up to my move were busy, and my grandparents were by my side every step of the way, helping me fill out forms, buy supplies, and get everything ready. My parents barely showed any interest. "Do whatever you want," my mom said dismissively, when I informed her of my decision. On my first day walking through the university campus, I felt as though a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Every step I took on the brick path leading to the lecture halls was a step away from the shadows of neglect and injustice. I made a promise to myself that I would never waste the sacrifices my grandparents had made for me. I would live a life that would make them proud, because I knew that everything I had achieved was thanks to their unconditional love. My college years at New York University marked a major turning point in my life. Leaving behind a cold, unjust home, I began a new chapter where I could truly be myself. On my first day of class, I carried not only my dreams but also the hopes and love that my grandparents had instilled in me. I reminded myself that I could not afford to let them down. College life wasn't easy, but I loved every moment of it. Every lecture and project was a challenge I embraced with enthusiasm. Late nights spent studying in the library didn't discourage me, instead, they fueled my determination. I frequently called my grandparents to share small classroom victories, and every time, they cheered me on with warm encouragement. "You are our greatest pride, Emily," Grandpa Harold once said during a phone call, his voice filled with pride. The Americano classic was my favorite. Those words became a source of strength, helping me get through even the toughest days. In my sophomore year, I started an internship at a small financial firm. It was my first opportunity to apply what I had learned, and I quickly discovered I had a talent for financial analysis. "Emily, you have a rare gift for logical thinking," my supervisor told me during a midterm evaluation. That compliment reassured me that I was on the right path. By my final year, I had secured an internship at one of the largest financial firms in New York. The job provided not only valuable experience but also important connections. I worked harder than ever, not just to prove myself, but to feel deserving of the sacrifices my grandparents had made for me. When I graduated with honors and received a job offer from the company I had interned with, I knew I had achieved something I once thought impossible. During this time, my relationship with my parents grew increasingly distant. They rarely called to check in, and I didn't feel compelled to reach out either. My sister Laura occasionally sent short messages about her family's financial struggles with her husband James. Each time I read those messages, I felt a cold detachment. The pain that had once haunted me was gone, replaced by an acceptance that the gap between us was inevitable. In contrast, my bond with Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Harold remained as strong as ever. I frequently visited them during school breaks, bringing stories of my work and life. The warm dinners at their home were moments of true belonging. No pressure, no expectations, just pure, sincere love. Grandpa Harold often said, "Seeing you now, I know everything we did was worth it." Those words always brought tears to my eyes, reminding me that they were my true family. My career at the financial firm began to stabilize, and within 3 years I was promoted to project manager. The high salary and generous bonuses allowed me to purchase a small apartment in Manhattan, a dream I had never dared to imagine. On the day I moved in, I invited my grandparents to my housewarming party. Grandpa Harold looked around the apartment and smiled. "Emily, You did it! This is the result of all the hard work you've put in. Standing in my own apartment, seeing the pride in my grandparents' eyes, I knew I had not only overcome my past, but also built a bright future. I made a promise to myself that the love and values my grandparents had taught me would always guide me. They had given me more than just support. They had given me the foundation to thrive, and the belief that I could accomplish anything. The greatest loss of my life occurred one early autumn day when I received a call from the hospital. Grandpa Harold had suffered a severe heart attack and didn't survive. I rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep, his face serene as if he were dreaming of something beautiful. I collapsed under the weight of the news. He had always been by my side, the one who taught me how to face life with strength. And now? He was gone. Grandma Margaret was devastated by the loss. After more than 50 years by his side, she seemed to lose much of her will to live. I did my best to support her, but just 2 months later, she too left me forever. It was a time when I felt as if my entire world had crumbled. I had lost the two people who loved me most, and showed me what unconditional love truly meant. After the funeral, their lawyer invited me to his office to read their will. I knew my grandparents wanted to protect me, but I didn't expect that they had left everything to me. The house where I had grown up and a $250,000 savings account were entrusted to me, along with a handwritten letter from Grandpa Harold. In the letter, he wrote, "Emily, you are our greatest pride. What we've left behind is not just material wealth, but our belief that you will continue to live a life of dignity and purpose. Use this to build the future you deserve." I read the letter through tears, feeling the immense love and faith they had placed in me. Meanwhile, my sister Laura's life was falling apart. Her husband James lost his job and couldn't find stable work. Laura's career in marketing hadn't turned out the way she had hoped. With 2 young children and mounting debts, they were forced to move back in with our parents. The house that had once been cold and unwelcoming to me was now overcrowded and chaotic, with 4 additional people. It became a giant undercrowded, a type of depression that lasted into the midst. So, 2 years later, after my sister's recovery, I heard about this through mutual acquaintances, but no one from the family reached out to share their struggles or seek comfort. One day, my parents unexpectedly showed up at my apartment door, looking exhausted and drained. They sat down and began talking about Laura and James's hardships. "They can't afford their rent, and we're running out of money too," my mom said, her eyes filled with hope. "Emily, can you help? Your niece and nephew need a stable home." I sat silently for a long moment, as memories of my cold, neglected childhood flashed through my mind. Finally, I replied, "I'm sorry, but I can't help. Everything I have is thanks to Grandma and Grandpa, and I intend to honor their wishes by using it to build the future they wanted for me." My parents left, visibly disappointed and bitter. Not long after, Laura called me, accusing me of being selfish and heartless, but I knew I had made the right decision. The love my grandparents had given me was something I couldn't betray by handing it over to people who had never valued me. I decided to sell the house my grandparents had left me and use the funds to invest in my own business. I opened a small financial consulting firm focused on helping people like my grandparents, working-class families in need of guidance to manage their finances and secure their futures. Every day at work, I thought of Grandma and Grandpa, of their quiet sacrifices and boundless love. Their legacy became my motivation, driving me to create something meaningful that would endure. Through my efforts, I sought to honor them, not just in memory, but through the lives I helped improve, inspired by the love they had given me. After selling my grandparents' house, I used the money to buy a new home, a place I hoped would be the start of my fully independent life. It was a charming house in the suburbs with a spacious yard and a peaceful atmosphere. I had considered inviting my parents and Laura over to mend our relationship, but before I could do so, something happened that shattered any hope of reconciliation. The moment the change forever started afresh, but when it did, I smiled and nodded at Noah. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post from Laura. The words felt like a slap to the face. Can't wait for the housewarming party this weekend at my parents' gorgeous new home. So grateful I could help make it happen. The post included pictures of the house I had just bought, decorated with balloons and a lavish party setup. I froze, feeling an overwhelming sense of betrayal. At first, I couldn't believe it. I called my mom, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I just saw Laura's post. Are you having a housewarming party at my house?" I asked. There was a brief pause before she responded. "Well, Emily, we just wanted to throw a small gathering. You've been so busy, so we didn't want to bother you," she said softly. But the lie in her words made my blood boil. I drove to the house immediately. As I pulled up, I heard music and laughter coming from inside. I walked through the unlocked front door and was stunned by what I saw. The house I had bought through my hard work was filled with strangers. My dad stood in the center of the living room, cheerfully chatting with a group of guests. "We're so proud of this new home," he announced loudly, "and we have to thank our wonderful daughter Laura for helping with the finances." I stepped further into the room and his voice faltered when he saw me. All eyes turned toward me. "Emily," my dad tried to compose himself, but I had reached my breaking point. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the room. "This house is mine. I bought it with my own money. Neither Laura nor anyone else had any part in that." The room fell into an awkward silence. Laura's face flushed as she stared at the floor, and my mom avoided eye contact. "Emily, we were just trying to have a family gathering," she began, but I didn't let her finish. "A family gathering where I wasn't even invited? And you lied, claiming Laura helped buy this house? This is beyond unacceptable." I turned to the guests. "Thank you for coming, but this party is over. Please leave my house." The crowd quietly gathered their things and left without a word. My parents and Laura were the last to leave, their expressions a mixture of guilt and resentment. Just before walking out the door, my mom turned to me and said, "You're being incredibly selfish, Emily." I didn't respond. I simply closed the door behind them. That night I sat alone in the empty house, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. I knew I had done the right thing, but the pain of my family's betrayal cut deep. This house had once been a symbol of my success, but now it was a painful reminder of the irreparable rift between me and the people who had given me life. After a sleepless night of reflection, I made a decision. I would sell the house. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to free myself from the painful memories it now held. I needed a fresh start in a new place, one untainted by the wounds of my family's betrayal. It was time to move forward, leaving the past behind, and building a future free from their shadow. After selling the house, I felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The money from the sale was deposited into my savings account not just as a preparation for the future, but also as a reminder of the independence I had built with my own efforts. I made the difficult decision to cut all contact with my parents and Laura. It wasn't easy, but I knew that maintaining those relationships would only continue to hurt me. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly heal. In the days that followed, I focused on my work and personal life. I moved into a smaller but cozy apartment that was entirely my own. This space brought me the peace I had been searching for. Every morning I brewed a cup of coffee, sat by the window overlooking the city, and reminded myself of how far I had come. Overcoming the pain and challenges of my past. Through persistence, I in fact returned myself to okay. In moments of quiet reflection, I often thought about Grandpa Harold and Grandma Margaret. Their guidance and unconditional love continued to be the compass for my decisions. I made a promise to myself that if I ever had children, I would love them equally and unconditionally. They would never feel compared or abandoned as I once did. I wanted to create a family where every member felt valued and cherished. One day, while walking through a nearby park, I saw a mother playing with her two young children. The sight made me smile and brought back fond memories of my time with my grandparents. In that moment, I realized I didn't need a perfect family to become a good parent. What mattered was that I had learned from the mistakes of others, and knew how to give love. As time passed, I gradually built a new life. one that was fuller and more meaningful. My financial consulting business flourished, and I dedicated part of my income to supporting organizations that helped children and struggling families. I believed that the best way to honor my grandparents was to help others who needed a little kindness and support to overcome their hardships. Although I no longer spoke with my parents and Laura, I didn't feel lonely. I surrounded myself with new relationships, friends and colleagues who genuinely valued and supported me. I also learned how to forgive, not to reconcile with those who had hurt me, but to free myself from the burden of pain and anger. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it meant accepting that the past couldn't be changed, but the future could. One morning while journaling, I wrote down a promise to myself. I will become the person I once wished I had in my life. That promise became a driving force, motivating me to continue striving, not only in my career, but also in building a future I could be proud of. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was ready for it. I had learned how to love myself, to heal from the wounds of the past, and to build a life founded on love, fairness, and hope. And one day, when I have children, they will not endure the pain I once did. They will grow up surrounded by love, support, and the unwavering belief that they are always worthy. Because that is how I will love them. Just as Harold and Margaret loved me. The takeaway from this story is the importance of love, fairness, and independence. Family wounds can leave deep scars, but they do not define who we are. The sacrifices and unconditional love from the grandparents teach us that true family isn't always about blood relations, it's about the people who love and value us. More importantly, learning to stand on our own, build our lives, and love ourselves is the key to overcoming pain and creating a brighter future. What are your thoughts on this story? What lessons did you take away from it? Don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more heartwarming and meaningful stories about family and life. The upcoming stories will make you reflect and inspire you. There are invitations that aren't meant to celebrate, but to remind you that you don't belong. I received the wedding invitation from my sister on a bitterly cold winter morning just as November rolled into Boston. The cover glittered like a cruel joke. Elegant white with gold lettering, printed on thick cardstock sharp enough to cut skin. I thought it was a bank notice or a tuition bill for my son. I didn't expect this. Just a few lines of capitalized formality, but I read them over and over again, as if decoding some hidden threat. My name and my son's, Aiden, were written in full, respectfully, as if we hadn't been treated like outsiders by our own family. And the sender? Charlotte Blake. The sister I stopped calling my sister years ago. I placed the wedding invite on the kitchen counter, next to the unpaid electric bill. The heater sputtered and clicked from age, and the faint scent of cold coffee lingered in our one-bedroom apartment. Aiden was sitting on the floor, carefully folding a paper airplane model. A freebie I picked up from a local community fair. He looked up when I sighed. "What's wrong, Mom?" I hesitated, then handed him the invitation. He read slowly, eyes widening like he'd just discovered something magical. "Aunt Charlotte's getting married? Are we going? I've never been to a wedding." I smiled faintly, though my heart tightened in my chest. Charlotte, or rather, Miss Charlotte Blake, was always the star. Beautiful, socially gifted, and especially adored by our mother Loretta. Since our father Henry passed from a stroke 4 years ago, I'd been quietly erased from every family photo. My presence seemed to exist only as a shadow, one my mother no longer acknowledged. Dad had always been the only one in my corner. When I had Aiden at 27 with a man the family deemed beneath us, he didn't get angry, he just said gently, "You're a good mom. That's enough." But after he died, everything crumbled. My mother said I was a disgrace. Charlotte called my son the result of a foolish mistake. The calls stopped. The handshakes at family events turned into cold nods. I never told Aiden the truth. He still believed Aunt Charlotte was amazing and that Grandma was just really busy. I couldn't bring myself to take away those innocent dreams. I looked at Aiden for a long moment, just 8 years old, yet already familiar with waiting for me to finish late shifts, skipping toys so I could buy milk. He'd never worn a suit. never stepped inside a five-star hotel, never lived a day without watching me stretch tips from my barista job on Tremont Street. And now, his eyes lit up just from holding an invitation, from someone who once called his mother an embarrassment. I knew I couldn't say no. That night, after Aiden fell asleep, I sat alone on our creaky wooden balcony chair. The chill seeped through my sweater, but I didn't go inside. I flipped through an old photo album, back when the three of us smiled freely. Charlotte was just a short-haired little girl, always clinging to Dad, and there had been a family once. There had been love. There had been a place to come home to. Now, there was just me. A single mother. And a child. Who didn't know he was born. From courage, not regret. The next morning, I called Charlotte. "Hi, it's Harper. I got the invitation, thank you. We'll be there." There was a flicker of surprise in her voice, but she stayed perfectly poised like someone newly engaged to a handsome CEO. "Oh, you'll come, great. Mom will be thrilled." "Oh, Harper. The wedding's quite formal, everyone's dressing appropriately. I hope you and Aiden will blend in." I gripped the phone. My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed calm. "Don't worry, I won't embarrass you." I hung up and looked out the window. Snow had started falling softly. Just like everything in my life. Cold, unexpected, and without warning. I would go. Not for Charlotte, not for my mother, but for Aiden. And for Dad. For once, just once, I wanted my son to see his mother walk into a room she was told she didn't deserve to enter. The taxi stopped in front of the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Once a place I only passed by, looking up from the sidewalk. Today I wasn't the barista smelling of espresso. I was a mother, walking her son into a world of chandeliers and fresh orchids. Aiden clutched my hand. He wore a light gray suit and a blue-striped tie. I had trimmed his hair the night before, trying to make him look as neat and presentable as I could. As for me, a navy blue dress rented from a thrift store and clearance sale heels. I might not shine, but no one could say I didn't look appropriate. Inside, the setting felt like a movie. Vaulted ceilings, sparkling crystal chandeliers, white orchids cascading from pillars, and soft classical music. But the glances from real people cut sharper than glass. "Mom? I'm kinda scared," Aiden whispered. I knelt to fix his collar. "You don't have to be like them, Aiden. Just be yourself. And remember, we have every right to be here." We stepped into the main hall. A staff member led us past rows of white rose centerpieces and scented candles. He glanced at the seating chart, then pointed toward the emergency exit. "Table 23, far right, extended family section." I nodded, thanked him, and took Aiden's hand again. Our table sat beside a stone pillar, next to the HVAC unit, nearly hidden behind a 6-foot screen. Other tables had velvet linens and satin bows on the chairs. Ours? Simple fabric-covered plastic chairs. No flowers. No name cards. Aiden looked around. "Mom, why is our table different?" I squeezed his hand gently. "They just made a mistake. But it's okay, we're here to enjoy ourselves." I was about to pour us water when a sharp voice rang out. "Harper? Wow, you actually came." Charlotte, or the bride of the year, approached with a frozen smile. Her mermaid-cut gown sparkled with crystals under every light. Each step seemed to remind me I didn't belong. "Aiden, you've grown so much. You look, well, behaved." Her voice sounded like she was bestowing a favor. Then she turned to me, tilting her head slightly. "Sorry about the table, it's a bit out of the way. Richard's guests took up most of the front section. You understand, right?" I didn't respond, just offered a polite smile, barely enough to avoid being rude. Just then, my mother Loretta turned from the head table. She wore a deep purple satin gown, hair in an elegant updo, pearls covering her neck. She looked at me with undisguised discomfort. "Harper, you came. Hope it's not inconvenient. It wasn't a greeting. I felt Aiden's grip tighten around my fingers. I leaned down. His mother is never an inconvenience, but if anyone feels bothered, they're free to look the other way. Charlotte let out a soft laugh, then drifted away like a breeze laced with Chanel perfume. Loretta muttered under her breath, She always has to act so noble." The reception began. Expensive dishes were served: seared foie gras, truffle mushroom soup, smoked salmon with dill sauce. Our table wasn't served until I asked for the third time. Aiden was hungry. I asked for more bread, and the waiter looked at me like I was asking for scraps. "Did they forget about us, Mom?" Aiden asked, eyes glistening. "No, sweetie, they're just not used to kindness, so they tend to let it slip through." I wiped his mouth, my heart burning but my voice still soft. I could feel the stares like needles in my back, judgmental eyes, hushed giggles, and whispers I didn't need to hear to know they were about us. Then came the bride's family introductions. The host called out my mother's name, followed by Charlotte's family. Close relatives were invited on stage to toast the couple. My name wasn't mentioned, neither was Aiden's. I thought I shouldn't be surprised. Then something happened that made me freeze. Charlotte took the mic on stage, her eyes drifting toward our table. "Today is a special day, and I'd like to share this joy with a very special guest. Please everyone, turn your attention to table 23. The whole ballroom turned, a spotlight beamed directly onto Aiden and me. I recognized that look, the way Charlotte stared at me, like I was her final move in a perfectly orchestrated performance. I knew the humiliation wasn't over. But I didn't move. I wanted to see just how far she'd go. I held Aiden's hand tight as the blinding light locked onto our table like we were a cheap party trick being revealed. The murmurs died down, replaced by Charlotte's sweet and dangerously poised voice from the stage. "Thank you all for being here with us today, but I have a special gift I'd like to present to everyone." A chill ran down my spine. The spotlight clung to me and my son like invisible chains, dragging us into the judgmental center of the room. Charlotte stepped off the stage, microphone still in hand. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor like a fashion show rehearsal. She stopped in the middle of the ballroom, facing the crowd. "Let me introduce my sister Harper, the brave single mom, and my adorable nephew, Aiden. They are very special guests tonight." A few stifled laughs came from her wealthy social circle. People who had once politely shook my hand at someone else's wedding now stared at me with a blend of pity and amusement. Charlotte raised the mic again, her tone suddenly shifting into that of a seasoned auctioneer at Sotheby's. "And now, with all the love and generous spirit in this room, I'd like to kick off a little charity auction. One brave single mom and her sweet little boy, as a combo package. Do I have any opening bids?" Laughter exploded, applause rang through the ballroom like thunder. Aiden flinched, his small hand tightening around my finger. "Mom, what are they saying?" I bit down hard, tasting blood in my mouth just to stay composed. Charlotte was still smiling, her version of a clever social joke. "Of course I'm just kidding, but if anyone does want to help my sister and her kid live a little better, well, why not?" I stood up abruptly, but before I could say a word, a voice I prayed I'd never hear again cut through the noise. Loretta, my mother, grabbed the mic. "If that girl is the item on auction," she said, "then I think the bidding should start at $0, because frankly I've never seen her as worth anything." The room burst into savage laughter as if someone had flipped a switch. Some clapped, others pulled out their phones. A few faces looked uneasy, but no one spoke. No one stopped it. Everything went silent in my ears. Aiden was crying. Quietly, his face flushed red from shame. I bent down and held him tightly, my heart trembling with rage and humiliation. I was wrong to come, wrong to think an invitation could patch a decayed relationship. Wrong to hope my son would find something beautiful here. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay upright. "We're leaving, Aiden." But Mom, we are not something to be auctioned off. I took his hand and turned away from the spotlight, from the crowd laughing at our pain. But just as I did, a deep, steady voice rang out from the far end of the ballroom. $1 million. I froze. The room fell completely silent, like all the air had been sucked out. I turned around. Everyone followed my gaze. Standing there in a charcoal gray suit, navy tie, tall and dignified, was a man with salt and pepper hair. The spotlight caught the sharp lines of his face and the cold fire in his eyes. I'm bidding $1 million to buy Harper and her son. And if necessary, I'll pay extra to shut the mouths of every person who just laughed at them. Charlotte's mouth fell open. My mother stood frozen, her hand trembling around the mic. I knew him. He wasn't a stranger. He was Daniel Rowe, once my father's personal attorney. A name I'd only seen in old legal letters. Daniel calmly walked toward the stage. No one stopped him. Maybe because no one knew how. No one had ever seen an auction turn upside down like this. He looked at me, his gaze softening. Harper, I'm here to finish what Henry, your father, never got the chance to do. Charlotte forced a laugh. You're joking, right? This is a wedding, not a courtroom. Daniel turned to her, his eyes sharp as a blade. You better pray this doesn't turn into a courtroom. Because if I reveal everything I know, this won't end with a wedding. I hadn't even had the chance to pull Aiden out of the ballroom when the name Daniel Rowe hit me like a bolt from the past. Every cell in my body froze. Daniel, he was the man my father used to mention during the rare quiet nights we shared tea together. A quiet lawyer, but absolutely trustworthy. He walked directly to the stage, moving slowly as if the tension in the air had no effect on him. When he reached the microphone, he scanned the entire room, before his eyes settled on me. I'm sorry, Harper. I wish I could have met you under better circumstances, but today, I have to speak the truth. Because it was Henry Blake's wish that it be done on this exact day. Charlotte clenched the fabric of her wedding dress, her face pale. Loretta stood behind her, wavering like she was about to faint. Daniel pulled a thick sealed envelope from his suit jacket. This is the final, legally binding will of Mr. Henry Blake, signed and notarized on June 2, 3 years ago. He didn't leave everything to Loretta or Charlotte like everyone assumed. Instead, he paused, drew out a legal document, held it up under the spotlight and looked directly at my mother and sister. He left 90% of his estate and the full ownership of Blake Properties to Harper and Aiden. The air seemed to be sucked from the room. A murmur rose and was instantly silenced. I thought I'd misheard. Charlotte stormed forward, her voice sharp and shrill. What? No! That's fake! My father had a will from 4 years ago. His personal attorney witnessed it. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, but that was before he learned about the scheme you and your mother orchestrated. When he discovered the funds quietly funneled from the company accounts into a private trust called Blake Legacy Future under your name, he quietly rewrote all his legal documents. With signatures, video footage and witnesses. He turned to the room. And one of those witnesses is sitting here today. Judge Harold Bennett. Present today as an honorary guest. All heads turned toward a distinguished older man seated near the back. He gave a small, solemn nod, but it held the weight of a gavel in a courtroom. Charlotte stumbled back like she'd been shoved against a wall. Loretta erupted. You have no right to humiliate us like this. This is a wedding, not a courthouse. Daniel remained composed. I'm not humiliating anyone, Mrs. Loretta. You publicly insulted your daughter and grandson in front of 300 guests. I'm simply fulfilling Mr. Henry's final instruction, exposing the truth and ensuring his assets go to their rightful heirs. I stepped forward, my heart thudding like a drum. Aiden clutched my hand tightly, asking nothing, but his eyes were filled with questions. Mr. Daniel, I trembled. My father. He really remembered us? Daniel smiled, a soft, warm smile. Not only did he remember you, he worried about you every single day. Even when you stayed silent, never asked for anything, he prepared everything. He once told me, Harper is strong, but I don't want her to carry it all alone. I broke down in tears. Not for the inheritance, not for the money, but because, for years, I thought I'd been forgotten. Turns out, the only person who truly listened to me had been thinking of me until his last breath. Daniel turned back to the stage. As of today, legally, Harper will assume leadership of the company. All of Mr. Henry's assets, his homes, stocks, bank accounts, including over $18 million, will be transferred to her name. Charlotte nearly screamed. No, no way, this can't be happening. Daniel didn't even turn around. His voice was ice. You're free to file a lawsuit, but I suggest you find a good attorney, because the evidence of your embezzlement was submitted to the federal tax office this morning. Loretta staggered, gripping the back of a chair. I looked at her, this woman who once called herself my mother, now ghostly pale. Charlotte stood frozen in the spotlight, eyes blank, her wedding gown like a net binding her to her ridiculous performance. I bent down to Aiden. Mom, does that mean Grandpa always loved me? I choked back a sob. Yes, sweetheart, and he proved it in the best way he knew how. Daniel stepped down from the stage and handed me one final envelope. This is a letter from Mr. Henry. He asked me to give it to you, today. I took it and opened it. Inside were the familiar strokes of my father's handwriting. Shaky but still clear. My dearest Harper. If you're reading this, then Daniel has kept his promise. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when I should have. But you've always been the one I'm most proud of. Live your own life, and teach Aiden that he was born out of love, not a mistake. Love. Dad. I looked up, tears streaming down my face. But this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were the tears of someone who had just recovered a piece of her soul that had been lost for years. Daniel now stood at the center of a ballroom gone utterly silent. He pulled a set of sealed documents from his briefcase, the red wax seal glinting under the lights. He raised them high before the entire crowd, his voice low but striking like a hammer. This is the final, legal, last will and testament of Mr. Henry Blake, notarized at the offices of Rowe and Associates on June 2, 3 years ago. And as of this moment, it will be read publicly, for all to hear. I held Aiden's hand tighter. Loretta had retreated into the shadows, her face sheet white, while Charlotte stood as if petrified. Daniel opened the document and began to read slowly. I, Henry Blake, being of sound mind and full awareness, hereby declare this as my final will and testament, to distribute my assets fairly, truthfully, and for the true future of the Blake legacy. I hereby leave 85% of my total estate, including full ownership of Blake properties, all real estate holdings, bank accounts and investment portfolios, to my daughter Harper Blake, and my grandson Aiden Blake. The entire ballroom filled with murmurs, which fell silent as Daniel continued. The remaining 15% shall be allocated as an annual living allowance for my wife Loretta Blake, on the condition that she does not interfere with any business operations of the company. I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. Loretta must have stood up. Charlotte swayed, her lips frozen, eyes unblinking. Daniel paused, set down the papers and pulled out a larger envelope from his coat pocket. And now, this is the part I believe both Miss Charlotte and Mrs. Loretta should pay close attention to. The documented evidence of unauthorized asset transfers and misuse of company property over the past 3 years. He opened the folder. The projector lit up behind him, displaying a detailed breakdown of bank transactions, account numbers, timestamps, recipients, each linked to shell corporations tied to Charlotte and Loretta. Daniel glanced around the now silent crowd and enunciated every word. Over the past 3 years, more than $3,800,000 was illegally transferred from Blake Properties' internal accounts into private funds, including the Blake Future Legacy Trust under Charlotte's name, and 2 accounts in the Cayman Islands controlled by Loretta. Loretta hissed. That's family money. Henry had no right to cut me out of the estate like this. Daniel turned to face her calmly. Mrs. Loretta, you are entitled to retain 15% of the estate as specified by Mr. Henry. However, the amount you embezzled exceeds your inheritance by more than double. Legally, this constitutes misappropriation of assets and abuse of authority within a private organization. Charlotte, looking unhinged, rushed to the microphone and yanked it from Daniel's hand. You people are making this up. It's all fake. This is just his revenge, and that crazy woman's, my sister. I stepped forward, my voice no longer trembling. Yes, I'm the crazy one. The crazy one who's been labeled the shame of the family for the last 10 years. But it was my father, the man you tried to erase from his own legacy, who was the only one left with a conscience in this rotten family. I turned to Daniel and gave him a nod. He pulled out one final document. This is Mr. Henry's internal memo, stored and sealed in my law office. In it, he wrote, I'm withholding the reading of my will to observe Loretta and Charlotte's behavior over the next 3 years. If they continue to manipulate and hurt Harper, I want my daughter to have clear, solid proof, not just of my decision, but of justice. I could barely breathe. Aiden clung to me, whispering, Grandpa was amazing, Mom. I swallowed my tears and nodded. Daniel turned back to the audience. All evidence has been submitted to the federal court, the IRS, and the Blake Properties Board of Directors. Tomorrow, Harper Blake will officially assume full executive control of the company. Charlotte screamed. You can't do this. I built the client network. I'm the face of the brand. Daniel shrugged. But you don't own it. And starting today, you are suspended from all representation roles and will be held financially accountable. If you object, the court will respond with the law. Loretta was speechless. She collapsed back into her chair, her hands trembling. I walked onto the stage, stood beside Daniel and looked out across the room, where a few of my father's old friends smiled at me with genuine respect. I didn't use any flowery words, I just spoke the truth. I didn't come back for revenge. I came to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And I'll use it to create something better, not another place of deception that excludes the vulnerable. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising like a wave. For the first time in years, I stood at the center, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the sole heir of Henry Blake. 3 weeks after that night that felt like hell, I stood on the 27th floor of Blake Properties, overlooking the tightly packed skyline of downtown Boston, where I once felt like an outsider, now standing as the person in charge. The nameplate on the office door had been changed. CEO, Harper Blake. The door opened, Daniel walked in with the legal secretary and placed a thick file in front of me. This is the final transfer package. All assets, shares, and executive authority have been legally processed. From this point forward, Harper, it's your game. I nodded, my hands still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of a power I never dared to imagine holding. A part of me wanted to run from that glass-walled room. But the part of me that had been crushed for a decade was burning bright. Thank you, Daniel. But I didn't come here to play games. I came to do what my father believed in. He smiled and left me alone in the room. I turned and looked up at the large portrait of Henry Blake hanging on the wall. His eyes were still sharp, but soft. Just like the last time, I heard him say my name without a trace of shame. Contrary to early rumors, the transition of power wasn't chaotic like many expected, because I didn't overthrow anything. I inherited. And I came with a clear vision, backed by a legal team led by Daniel. I called for a full company meeting. The boardroom was packed. No one knew what to expect. Many had only heard of me through HR reports or gossip, the daughter who ran off and had a child out of wedlock. But now they had to listen. I didn't bring speeches, I brought truth. My father, Henry Blake, built Blake Properties on the belief that wealth is not for show, it's a tool to create value for others. I paused, meeting every eye in the room. There was doubt, surprise, even suspicion. But over the past decade, this company has been distorted. Investments into phantom projects, lavish PR for an unqualified heir, contracts handed to friends. That's not the legacy he left. I clicked to the next slide. My new initiative. Blake Community Vision 20242-030. We're changing how we operate. From now on, 15% of the company's annual profits will go toward funding affordable housing for single mothers, veterans, and re-entry citizens. The room was silent. At the same time, I'm launching the Henry Blake Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting education, healthcare, and small business startups for the disadvantaged. And the first full-ride scholarship recipient will be Aiden Blake. Scattered applause turned into strong, steady clapping. Not for power, but for a vision worth believing in. Meanwhile, Loretta and Charlotte were left with nothing but an inventory of seized assets. Bank accounts frozen. The Beacon Hill home repossessed. Cars, jewelry, designer bags, all auctioned to repay the embezzled funds. Charlotte was erased from elite social circles, her sponsorships cancelled, old friends vanished without a trace. Last I heard, she was renting a small apartment in South Boston, working as an assistant at a mid-tier real estate firm. One she once sneered at. As for Loretta, she once stood in cocktail parties, flashbulbs lighting up her face. Now, she lives in a small, one-story home on the outskirts of Worcester, receiving a temporary stipend from the 15% share reserved for her in the will. I don't hate them anymore. I just don't care. 1 month later, I was interviewed by Boston Business Weekly. So how do you feel about being called the city's first humanitarian CEO? I just smiled. I don't want to be a humanitarian CEO. I just want to be someone who can sleep well at night, knowing my father would be proud. On an early spring morning, I took Aiden to visit our first housing project in Roxbury, the same area where I once lived in a cramped rental apartment. His face lit up when he saw the project name engraved at the entry sign. Blake Haven, a home built from kindness. Mom, can I work here one day? I pulled him into a hug. You won't just work here, Aiden. One day, you'll lead this place, if you choose to. But remember, not for power, but because you have the heart to do what's right. He nodded, eyes shining under the morning sun. It was then I realized. Justice isn't always about making the wicked kneel. Sometimes, justice is simply returning good people to the place they always deserved. Exactly 1 year after that wedding, the day every mask was torn off, I received an unexpected call from the front desk. Ms. Harper, there are 2 visitors waiting in the lobby. They say, they're your mother and sister. I looked out the glass window. Boston rain tapped softly on the 27th floor pane, like it was knocking on memories I'd shoved deep into a drawer. But that voice from a year ago still echoed in my head. Not worth a cent. I didn't say anything, just nodded and told the receptionist to send them up. Moments later the door opened. Loretta and Charlotte stepped in. No silk dresses, no Prada bags. My mother wore a simple sweater and a faded gray skirt. Charlotte looked thinner, her skin pale from either stress or life, I couldn't tell. Harper, Loretta said softly. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard. I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I didn't invite them to sit. They didn't dare assume they could. Charlotte stood beside her, eyes lowered. For the first time in years, she didn't walk like a model on a catwalk. We came to apologize, she said, her voice raspy like it had been forced through her throat. What happened before, I can't undo. But I want to take responsibility. Even just a little. I folded my arms and leaned back against the desk, studying them. No anger. No sarcasm. Just silence heavy enough to crush the room. How've you lived this past year? I asked plainly. Loretta glanced nervously at her daughter. Charlotte bit her lip. I'm working as a sales assistant at a small real estate firm, mostly entering data and calling clients. The pay covers the basics, and Mom lives with me. I nodded slowly. Everyone pays for their choices. But I wasn't a judge with a gavel. I was a mother. And my father, The man who had placed his final trust in me had once been a husband, a father to the two people now standing before me. "I'm not bringing the past back in," I began. "It's too filthy to take home. But I have one condition." They looked up, confused. "I'll provide Mom a fixed monthly allowance just as stated in Dad's will. And Charlotte, I'll give you a legitimate position in one of the non-profit arms of the company, if you truly want to make things right." They both looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. "But," I cut in, "I'm not giving this for free. In return, once a month you both must come visit Aiden. Not to redeem yourselves, but so he can understand that family is something we can rebuild. If we choose humility." Loretta broke down in tears, tears falling on cheeks that had once been too cold to offer even a glance of compassion. "Thank you. For not becoming the kind of mother I once was." I said nothing. I simply opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. The three of us, Charlotte, Dad, and me, from a picnic when I was 16. Dad's smile beamed, arms wide, like he was trying to embrace both his daughters. I set the photo on the table. "For him. And for Aiden." Charlotte stepped forward, hesitantly placing her hand on my shoulder. For the first time in my life, I felt her hand tremble. She wasn't the proud younger sister anymore, not the bride in a designer gown mocking her own sibling. Now she was just a broken woman, trying to find her way back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, I just want to learn how to love. The way you loved Aiden. And yourself." I didn't say anything. I opened the door and gestured for them to leave, then quietly added, "See ya, first week of next month. Aiden will be waiting." A few weeks later, on a quiet late autumn afternoon, with sunlight just golden enough to spill warmth on the doorstep, Loretta and Charlotte came to my home. Aiden opened the door. "Grandma, Aunt Charlotte?" He was surprised, but he didn't step back. He simply looked at me, seeking confirmation. I gave him a small nod. He smiled and tugged them inside. In the little kitchen, I brewed tea. They sat at the dining table where I used to cry alone every night, and now, soft laughter fluttered in the air, not loud, not complete, but enough to begin again. I stood in the doorway, tea in hand, gazing at the photo of Dad hanging above the fireplace. "Dad, I did it. But not to defeat anyone, only to preserve what you always believed. A family doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest and brave enough to heal." It was the second spring since everything changed, and Boston felt like it had finally awakened from a long slumber. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the banks of the Charles River, bicycles trailed through the public garden, and Aiden, the once timid boy who used to hide behind me in crowds, was now walking hand in hand with Daniel onto the stage at the Youth Leadership for Community Forum. I sat in the front row, heart steady. Not from nerves, but from emotion. "Your son is wonderful," an older woman beside me whispered. I smiled, watching Aiden stand tall, delivering a short speech with clarity and confidence. "My name is Aiden Blake. My grandpa taught me that kindness isn't a weakness, it's what makes people trustworthy. I want to grow up and build houses for people who don't have a place to go, like my mom is doing, like my grandpa used to do." The room erupted in applause, but I simply wiped away a quiet tear. That boy who was 8 is now 9, and more grown up than many adults who've crossed my life. Daniel and I never had a define the relationship talk. We didn't need one. After the last time, he rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to prove anything anymore, just live the life you want." Everything between us shifted. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't push me to open up. He was just there. Like a good man always chooses to be, when things aren't easy. Every weekend he took Aiden to museums, fishing at Walden Pond, or spent hours building model airplanes. Aiden calls him Uncle Dan, with the kind of respect that speaks louder than titles. As for me, I got used to someone bringing me coffee each morning at the office. Someone who knew I liked cinnamon, no cream. The only person who dared look me in the eye and say, "Harper, you're tired, shut it down, go home." I kept my promise to Dad. Blake Properties is no longer tied to meaningless luxury developments. We've built 3 new affordable housing communities in Dorchester, East Boston, and a section of Worcester. Each one includes a library, playground, legal aid center, and parenting skill workshops for single parents. I didn't use my name to paint ideals. I used results. And what I'm most proud of is this. When people mention the name Harper Blake, they no longer say, the daughter who was disowned and fought back. They say, the CEO who turned a real estate company into a foundation for hope. As for Loretta and Charlotte, things aren't perfect. But they're honest. Charlotte has gradually found stability working at the Blake Foundation. She's not a manager, doesn't appear in press releases. She chose to stay behind the scenes. And I let her. No praise, no criticism. Loretta still lives in Worcester. She visits Aiden once a month. She's never late. She never asks for anything. She never says I'm sorry again. But the way she looks at my son tells me enough. She's trying, in her own way. Once, as I was helping Aiden into the car, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "If you can forgive, then your father can. Rest easy." I didn't answer. But I didn't pull my hand away. That summer, I hosted a small backyard gathering at our new home in Newton. Not to show off. Just a moment to let the people who stood by me during the storm sit together under warm lights, with grilled food, buttery pastries, and genuine laughter. Aiden ran around with his new friends, Daniel was out back making French mild cold brew, Charlotte helped set the table, Loretta sat under the awning reading to a little girl. The daughter of an employee once helped by one of our housing projects. I stood in the middle of the yard, wine glass in hand, looking at all those people. A year ago, I didn't believe in family anymore. Today, I don't just believe. I live it, flawed, scarred but real. And I understand now. Family isn't made of people who are always right. Family is made of those who are willing to face their wrongs, willing to stay, and brave enough to begin again. With a listening heart. I looked up at the summer sky, clear and blue, as if all the old pain had finally lifted. Dad, if you're watching from somewhere, I just want to say, I'm okay now, Aiden's okay, and what you believed in is growing, little by little, from gratitude. Harper's story isn't just a fight for justice. It's a powerful testament to resilience, motherhood, and the healing that truth can bring. From a single mother cast out by her family, she rose, reclaimed her dignity, protected her son, and built a life grounded in lasting values. Most of all, she learned to forgive, not to forget the past, but to clear the way for a better future, for herself and those around her. What do you think about Harper's journey and the way she chose to confront her past? Would you have forgiven like she did? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, healing, and hope.